or have we just lost the money?
I want to be clear that of the $194 million that was unaccounted for, not all of that was funding that was uncollected. Some of that was funding that was collected but not clearly accounted for. The collection of it had not been matched up with the project in question in the accounting system. So part of the effort that we've undergone has done that matching up. And so when I said some of those costs that we've resolved, the $52.2 million that we have resolved, some of it was funds collected, some of it was funds that could not be collected because there is no responsible party for the site. But a chunk of it also is costs that were recovered and were just not accounted. The accounting system didn't reflect that, and we've resolved those data errors. So I do want to be clear that these are not all costs that we have foregone. There are some costs that we have had to write off because there is no responsible party, or because the statute of limitations has expired and we cannot recover it. Going forward, one of the reforms we've made is, I think I mentioned, we have that electronic platform we're using to track projects. For every project, the statute of limitations is now specifically tracked on that dashboard. We're counting off when that deadline is approaching. We're making sure we have everything in place that needs to be in place by the time we hit that statute of limitations.
All right. Another issue that's emerging is this issue of Superfund site transfers or takeovers, when after a certain amount of time, the states then, I think it's 10 years, then the state really takes over the maintenance, is responsible for the ongoing operation and maintenance of the sites. It's unclear to me what happens at that point. We are 100% responsible then for these sites. Two questions: what is the cost that we're looking at? How many sites are there? And what is the plan to deal with these?
The cost is large.
How large?
I'm going to let Elise Rothschild, who is my new deputy over permitting, look through the binder to find the answer to that. Here we go. Thank you. Okay. So the costs, as I said, are large. In the current fiscal year, we have a projected balance of about $9.4 million in our site remediation account. We project that the demand on that account for Superfund sites, or sites that are on the national priority list, is about $4.7 million. And then we have a demand for our state orphan site program. And right now, we're projecting that demand to be at $7.9 million. So if you add all that up, that's 12.6, and it exceeds what's currently in that account. But I need to point out that when the total demand on the account is higher than the available funding, we delay our work on state orphan sites. So if there is insufficient funding, we slow down the work that we are not required by the federal government to do so that we can do the work that they require us to do. Now, that's in the current fiscal year. Over time, as more sites transition from federal responsibility to state responsibility, they move from a status where the federal government pays for 90% of the work and the state pays for 10%, to a status where the state pays for 100% of the work. If the remedy has been selected well, the costs of operating and maintaining that site are not real large. But sometimes the federal government and the state government have not agreed well on what that remedy ought to be, and a remedy is chosen that is less expensive up front when it's a federally funded project, but is heavier on the operation and maintenance end. And so we do have some sites where that is the case. We've already started working with US EPA to address this problem. My director, my deputy director of site cleanup has been meeting with his counterpart at US EPA Region 9, and staff below them are also working on this. But I have also started having conversations with EPA's Director of Superfund for Region 9, Enrique Manzanilla. He understands this is a large concern as we see this, the shortfall in our site remediation account is expected to increase over time, so that in the out years, and I'm talking maybe by 2019, we're looking at perhaps having a total demand on that fund of about $24 million and only $9 million available. So, or 10 million available. So it's a significant shortfall. He has indicated that the federal government may be able to help with some of those costs. And we're exploring what other avenues we will have to ensure there's funding in place to make sure the work is properly overseen and completed. But it is a real challenge. And as we get a better sense of the concrete problem and what we've been able to resolve between us and EPA, we'll then come back to you with a proposal for what to do about the remainder.
Are we obligated by law to take possession of or responsibility for these sites after 10 years? And is that federal law? Have we agreed to that, or?
I believe it's part of the program that we have approval to run. So we are authorized to implement the federal program that cleans up these sites. And so we are obligated under that authorization to do this. We might be able to relinquish the oversight of this program going forward, but I don't think it would relieve us from the obligation we currently have. And I would suggest that it would not be in the best interest of the residents of California to leave this up to the federal government to determine and implement these remedies without any state input. I'm not confident that we would see the result we want to see in our communities if we did that.
How about Susanna in Ventura County, where the responsible person is the federal government on that suit, and that's a complicated site.
So the situation is different when we have a responsible party that pays for the cleanup. The national priorities list sites that we're referring to, generally speaking, are sites where there isn't someone that we can turn to recover these costs. And so in the case of Santa Susana, we do have responsible parties. We have a couple of departments at the federal level, and we also have Boeing at that site as a responsible party. And so we have a process in place. We have orders of cleanup that are that have been approved at the federal level and by the state. We're in the process of going through the environmental impact review of those cleanups, including the Boeing site, which is not covered by the AOCs. And we also have a process in place with the federal government to where they are obligated to fund the cleanup. Now, as you're aware, there are always issues in the allocation of federal dollars. The federal government is responsible for many cleanups across the country. They typically don't allocate as much money for cleanup as is needed to clean up all sites on the schedule, that all sites are on a schedule to be cleaned up. So we do go through a process with them every year, looking at the allocation, what they've received, and how what they received affects the timeline to complete the work. But it doesn't change the level of cleanup, and it also doesn't change what we pay.
Okay, and 100 questions. Can we anticipate that the department is going to come back to us in the out years beyond 2019 and 2020 because as we develop laws or you do investigations, the level of cleanup on some of these sites that the federal government has made may not pass California mustard, if I can put it in that vein, because we're already at a $15 million shortfall, but we may, for health reasons and the whole plethora of rules that we have here. Is that, I don't know if that's part of the work plan, I'm making more work here instead of,
Well, no, it's an excellent question, Mr. Chairman, and one of the efforts we have underway right now is a thorough examination of all of our statutory obligations in terms of the programs that we implement and the resources we have to implement them and what the difference is between the two. And we do plan to be able to make a report to you on that so we can develop a plan going forward about either adjusting the work or adjusting the funding and what the opportunities are for that. But we're in the early stages of that. We don't have something to present to you right now. It's certainly whatever we come up with will be in cooperation with the Department of Finance and the rest of the administration. So we're at the beginnings of this project, but we are looking at it. We're very much aware that there is a shortfall and that it's going to need to be addressed.
I think we just got the stipulation and order amending the 214 order, but I have noticed that no later than 5 days on page 4 of the effective date that Excite is to withdraw its application. So I assume that that's the permitting application. So that this is yet another unanticipated permit that you don't have to process. That's this, right?
That is this permit,
just
yes.
ends.
I have some very happy staff who will no longer need to complete the work on this permit. Yes, they will be withdrawing their application. What needs to happen because they're in bankruptcy is the order that they entered into with us and with US DOJ has to be approved by the bankruptcy court. That becomes the effective date. They will then withdraw their application.
Right, and because I'm a recovering bankruptcy attorney, I'm looking at this, is that on page, on page 9, on page 9, it appears as though that nothing in this order will be impaired by a plan of reorganization or any further rulings on the bankruptcy court. So you're getting, and also, which is incredible for me, that on the effective date of the plan, all liabilities and obligations to the department will not be discharged, which is a miracle. I don't know if people, I just read this like 10 minutes ago, but that's never happens. I never heard of that happening.
We've put a lot of work into making sure this comes out okay for the people of California.
So that means that the continuing entity, Excite, will
Is
be
still
legally responsible after the confirmation and the effective date of that plan.
That is correct,
So
yes.
okay, well, that's,
So that the money gets paid, the work gets done,
Right.
the site gets closed and cleaned up, and the residences get cleaned up as well.
can you brush me up on the other parts of the terms? Because those are the things that I can't control myself. That was really good, but I wanted to ask you. But the residential cleanup, can you,
Residential, the cost,
and the what's going to happen?
Certainly, I would be happy to do that.
but briefly, just hit the highlights so we can get.
Absolutely. There are several things that Excite's obligated to do. They are obligated to properly close the facility and clean up the site the facility is on. So that means taking down all of the buildings, every speck of concrete on that site, removing all of the contamination. So they are on the hook to do that. They have to post funding with us, and there is a schedule for them to do that, and they begin the work right away. So they are doing the work while they are paying into the trust fund. They can't draw down the trust fund until they have completed the first phase of the work. And then they move into the second phase of closure and cleanup on the site. There are some studies that they still have to do to characterize the full extent of contamination on the site, and that will affect their future obligations for payment of that part of the work. In addition, they are obligated to sample the industrial areas surrounding the site, and that is underway. And then based on that sampling, they will be obligated to pay for the cleanup of the properties, the industrial properties they've contaminated. We have also done sampling, very detailed sampling in specific areas of assessment to the north and the south of the facility based on modeling work that the South Coast Air District did that predicted those would be the high impact areas. That sampling has been done. They were required under our original order to provide $9 million over time for that for the cleanup of those residences. They have already paid $3 million and begun that work. They are obligated to pay another $3 million, or were obligated to pay another $3 million upon emerging from bankruptcy under our original order. The effect of the US DOJ non-prosecution agreement is that they will pay the entire remainder of that $9 million upon emerging from bankruptcy. So all those funds will be there. The work will be done going forward to clean up those residences. In addition, we have an agreement with them in our revised order to pay an additional $5 million to the department starting in 2018 to ensure there are funds in place to do further cleanup.
All right.
Thank you. On the cost recovery, one of the segments that you have are matters that are in bankruptcy and litigation, and I assume that those are not, completed bankruptcies where the court has said that there's, their discharge if it's an individual or the case is closed. That's pending, because that's a pretty large number. It's like $73 million, right?
71, and yes, Senator, and they are not all in bankruptcy. Some of them are in bankruptcy. Some of them are, we're prosecuting them for failure to pay for those costs, and we expect to recover them.
Yeah, because several times in the foundation report and things, it says that we're going to ensure that no public money is used for these people filing bankruptcy. I said, well, I'm thinking you may not have a choice about that. That's an order of the court. On the $71 million that we're still on the cost recovery that you haven't got your arms around it. Can you give me a little bit more detail of what we're going to expect? Because I know one of the things as I was reading the foundation report and the update is that, if we've blown a statute, I'm a lawyer, if you've blown a statute, own it. We blew the statute. We think that these people are morally responsible, but we didn't file the case in federal court or state court. It's an uncollectible debt, and write it off, because it's odd for me to be looking at debt from 1987 and saying, well, I mean, maybe they're paying on it, but that would be a miracle. So can you give me a little bit more on that, on the work that you still have to do in that other $71 million?
So I would expect it's going to be the same sorts of, the same mix of outcomes that we've seen so far. We will, as we move through the costs that haven't been recovered, identify costs we can recover, and we will recover them. Some will require litigation and will be referred to litigation. Some will be associated with entities that either there was no responsible party, there never was a responsible party. It should always have been assigned to the orphan fund. We just didn't do the bookkeeping right. Others will be parties that are no longer extant because of bankruptcy or other proceedings, and we aren't able now to recover those costs. And some will be in the bin where we have missed the statute of limitations. They are not all outside the statute of limitations by any stretch. We do expect we will recover more costs going forward.
So where we're at right now, from your perspective, is there some lack of clarity from the statutory directives on what the mandates of the departments are as we've gone through our backlog in the enforcement and in permitting, that the department needs some additions, some more laws that we have to pass to have the department fulfill its mandate?
I wouldn't go that far yet, no. I would say that we're aware that there are statutes that we may not be fully implementing. There may be statutes that we are implementing, but we're doing it because they're there on the books, but maybe it's really not the best use of the taxpayers' dollars to be focusing in those areas now. So what we're starting to do is go through and comprehensively look at all of the charges that we have placed upon us, what is needed to carry out all of them as described in the statutes now, where the shortfalls are in what we have and what we are doing relative to what the statutes require, and what changes we would recommend, either that we not do things, or that we need more resources to do things, or maybe we all wish we could do these things, but the resources just aren't there, and we're going to need to cut them. The reality is, we'll have to come to an agreement about what everybody expects the department is doing, and how we're going to pay for what we're doing. Part of that process is us going through the very rigorous evaluation of our procedures and our practices so that you can be confident that if work isn't being done, it's not because we're inefficient or don't know what we're doing. It's because we really and truly don't have the resources. The department today, if we consider all of the limited term positions we currently have, plus the positions that we are asking for in the coming budget year, we'll have about 1,005 positions. If you look back at the position level in the department when it was first created, we had 1,001 positions. So we have within 4 positions the same number of people now that we did when the department was created a couple of decades ago. The spending power of the revenue we receive, if you look at it on an inflation-adjusted basis, has decreased by 26%. Our mandates, however, have gone up considerably. So you have the same number of people with fewer resources doing more work. To some extent, we've been able to do that. To some extent, we have not, and there is work that isn't being done. Our first job is to make sure that everything we're doing thoroughly and efficiently and effectively, and then we'll talk with you about what isn't being done and what we collectively agree is the right path forward to get the work done and get the work paid for.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Okay. Senator Nielsen and then Senator Leno.
Thank you, and welcome to the directorship. The troubled times, maybe sometimes the best times, the challenging times, and we appreciate your willingness to try to grab on and do something about it, but understand the seriousness of the situation. The timing of the order late yesterday to shut the project down with this hearing the very next day, is there any coincidence to that at all?
The timing, Senator, was largely driven by the bankruptcy proceeding. And as it happened, Exide had an obligation to file papers in the bankruptcy proceeding, and the dates happened to coincide with this hearing. There is nobody on this planet who wishes more than I do that those dates had not coincided. I and my staff have not had a whole lot of sleep lately.
I understand the bankruptcy and the decision to shut down, but let's look a little bit beyond. A lot of things went on at that plant, and part of them are employees, and we want to be sensitive to the opportunities for those employees to be redirected. But what's that going to mean for all of the production that Exide did here in California on that plant? Where will the batteries come from? Where will Exide go to produce? What will happen as that site shut down?
That is also an excellent question. Exide Technologies in Vernon was one of 2 battery recycling plants west of the Rockies, both of which are in Southern California. The other one is Quemetco. My understanding is Quemetco has applied to the South Coast Air Quality Management District for a permit to increase its production, probably put in anticipation of the demise of its competitor. That's my editorial comment. I won't attribute that to the South Coast. So some of the recycling will be taken up by Quemetco.
Where is that?
It's in the City of Industry, which is also another impacted area.
Do they have, excuse me, Senator Nielsen, do they have a similar history that that this other one had? in
Quimet
terms of their relationship with the department?
Quimetco currently has a RCRA permit with the department. That permit will expire this year. They are obligated to submit an application 6 months in advance of its expiration for us to begin the process of renewing that permit. So they are not, even at this, they are in compliance with the requirements at this point in time, and we will be processing the renewal of that permit in an orderly way. Back to Senator Nielsen's question about where the batteries will go. There are other battery recycling plants in the country. Most of them are to the east of the Rockies, and we know of a couple that are owned by Exide Technologies. There is one in Muncie, Indiana, to which they are currently shipping all of the feed material that is stored at their facility in Vernon.
It's important for the public to note in the legislature that when we have these ideas that we don't want something someplace, something's going to have to happen somewhere else, and it's not in my backyard approach, and we've long had to grapple with that, and that's really the essence of the question. The backlog issue. Last year there were some 25 positions, I believe, limited term granted for you to address the backlog. Can you tell us what happened? Are those positions all filled? Or are they in process of being filled? And have they made progress? Are there benchmarks that will indicate that these PYs have been put in place and they're doing their work reducing the backlog?
We did put the staffing in place. One of the challenges with limited term positions is that you bring people on to do work, but they know that they're going to be out of a job in 2 years, and so if they get a permanent offer someplace else, they do tend to take it. So yes, we have brought staff on. Yes, they are performing. They're doing very good work. We've had excellent candidates applying for these jobs. We are making very good progress on the permit backlog. We are on track to reduce it, and we also are making progress on the permitting reforms to ensure that the backlog doesn't grow.
I want to get to the permit reform, but back to the backlog, then I am to assume you have a sustaining plan for backlog reduction, meaning that it's something in place. It's not just you've got the temporary positions. And the reason we do temporary positions is we expect that you won't need to make those permanent positions. It's the desire of government not to always just grow, but we have to have a sustained plan. And I'd inquire, maybe staff knows, is there a requirement that you have to report to the legislature each year on your backlog reduction? Some agencies with backlog are required to report their backlog reduction each year. Is that a requirement, or do you know that?
I will have to confess I don't know the answer to that.
It's not an academic, but it would be something for us to consider here in committee. It's a small thing maybe, but it does enhance some accountability, and you do have to provide a report every year. Now, you've requested, I think, additional PYs this year for the backlog reduction. Is that correct?
We have requested additional temporary staffing to address enhancements in the permit review process in support functions that are not. So let me back up and say, we received resources in the current year to enhance our permitting process focused on the core permit team. In the process of evaluating our permit review and identifying where the deficiencies in that review process are, we also identified that that there were additional enhancements we would need to make in different parts of our program, including our legal office, our enforcement office, our environmental review office that does the preparation of documents under CEQA, for example. So across the organization in 6 different offices and programs, we've identified where we have strategic needs to bring people in to address the process, improve the process, and ensure that systemically through the department, all pieces of the review of permits are brought up to the same enhanced level so that we can, in fact, meet that 2-year review target we have set.
Do you involve people from the industry in getting input as to what the permitting process impediments are and the delays? I mean, or do you broad public input into that permitting process? It's sometimes a knotty tangle for people to go through permitting, whatever the agency or whatever the individual in California. We have a huge problem now. What kind of input do you get to determine, well, what shall we do to make it a more friendly and expeditious permitting process?
That's a very good question. The process we've undergone so far has focused really on the nuts and bolts of the internal bottlenecks using evaluation tools that have been pioneered by some of the most effective and highly performing manufacturing and service companies in the world, actually. So I was fortunate enough I'm fortunate enough to have staff who were trained specifically in those evaluation techniques, and they've been applying them to our process. And it's focused mostly on the internal workings of the process as opposed to the outward-facing elements of the process. At the same time, we have a parallel effort underway under our Fixing the Foundations program to increase the input we get from external stakeholders so that we have a better understanding of how external stakeholders are interacting with the department and where they feel that interaction can be enhanced.
Yes.